Deadly Women is an American documentary television series focusing on true crime, specifically female killers. It first aired in 2005. It was originally based on a TV documentary film called Poisonous Women, which was released in 2003. Deadly Women started as a miniseries comprising 3 episodes: Obsession, Greed, and Revenge. After a 3-year hiatus, the show resumed production in 2008 and began airing on the investigation. Jacqueline Crimble, now 41, was jailed for 20 years in 2007 for killing her husband Paul, 35, with her lover Roger Ferguson, with whom she was having an affair. Dubbed the Black Widow, Crimble has always denied the murder and claimed a gang of masked men had attacked and tied up her husband on Father's Day 2004 after breaking into the family home. But the judge said she was guilty of the ultimate act of treachery, adding, "Like an executioner, you and Roger Ferguson put a black bag over his head, sealed it around his neck, watched as he struggled to breathe, and waited for him to die. The cruelty implicit in what you did defies belief." Her daughter Danielle, now 21, said her mother always had a short temper and continued to manipulate her children from behind bars. Speaking to the Sunday Mirror, she said Crimble, who she refers to as Jackie, used the fact that she had kept parental rights over Danielle and younger brother Adam to control them, an attempt to bully them into accepting she was innocent. "She'd try to bribe me into visiting her by saying she'd sign a consent form for school trips if I came to see her," Danielle told the newspaper. "Then when I went, she'd protest her innocence. When I said I didn't believe her, she'd refuse to sign the form. It meant I was the only kid in the class to be left behind." While she protested her innocence, she never showed a shred of remorse or upset at losing Daddy. Danielle was only 11 when she became aware of her mother's affair with Ferguson, which began in the months before the murder, and said he was always around the house when her father was out. Weeks later, her mother told her that the couple were planning to separate in a year, but were staying together for the children. On the night of the murder, the siblings had gone to stay with their paternal grandmother, so their parents could go out for a meal. As Father's Day was the next day, the children made cards, but Mr. Crimble never saw them. Police called in the morning to say a gang of masked men had confronted their parents in the early hours, tying up their mother and taking their father away in his car. Officers later found Mr. Crimble dead in the car, not far from the family home. But Danielle was not convinced by her mother's tears. "Rather than being grief-stricken and haunted as I was by the thought of how Daddy had died, she was still seeing Roger," she told the Sunday Mirror. The final insult came when Crimble burnt all of her husband's belongings and all photographs of him weeks after his death. Danielle only managed to rescue one picture of her and her father, which she treasures now. Eventually, Crimble and Ferguson's DNA were discovered at the scene, and after a 4-month trial, the pair were convicted. Crimble was sentenced to 20 years, while Ferguson, who was 31 at the time of the murder, got 18 years. Third defendant, Colin Robinson, who was 17, was convicted of assisting an offender and jailed for 3 years. The children were forced to go into care as Crimble wielded her parental rights to say they could not live with their grandmother. Danielle struggled to settle and had difficult teenage years until she moved to Basingstoke, aged 17, and was finally free from her mother's clutches at 18. Now she is a nursery school assistant and has found a supportive partner, acoustic engineer Simon Bryce. But she is haunted by her mother's actions. Jacqueline Crimble will finish serving her 20-year sentence in 2027. She continues to deny that she had any role in murdering her husband and will likely never admit the truth. She will likely try to contact her children because she'll need support reintegrating into society, but she doesn't have a relationship with them, or at least not a good relationship. She was a very bad mother before murdering their father, and even worse afterward. Understandably, her children became estranged from her and haven't contacted her in many years now, so they aren't going to be amenable to having her live with them or provide any financial support for her. Crimble will probably immediately start hunting for some foolish man willing to be her savior and take her into his home, give her his money, etc. She's the type who survives by preying on fools who like financially dependent women. She might even persuade one that she's innocent of murdering her last husband and persuade them to marry her. Roger Ferguson and Jacqueline Crimble were convicted of murder on the 17th of May, 2007. Dawn Margaret Ferguson, the mother of Roger Ferguson, was charged with attempting to pervert the course of justice. The Crown alleged that Roger Ferguson and Jacqueline Crimble had a common intention to kill the deceased and acted together to bring about his death. Forensic evidence linked a Caterpillar boot size 10 found at the crime scene to Roger Ferguson. Telephone records showed contact between Jacqueline Crimble, Roger Ferguson, and Colin Robinson at relevant times. Colin Robinson accused Jacqueline Crimble and Roger Ferguson of involvement in the murder. Dawn Ferguson was the only alibi witness for Roger Ferguson. The trial judge did not caution the jury adequately on relying on Colin Robinson's evidence. The trial judge did not leave the offense of manslaughter to the jury in Roger Ferguson's case. 1. Whether the joinder of Dawn Ferguson in the indictment prejudiced Roger Ferguson's trial. 2. Whether the trial judge adequately cautioned the jury on the evidence of Colin Robinson. 3. Whether the trial judge should have left the offense of manslaughter to the jury in Roger Ferguson's case. Reasoning. 1. The propriety of joinder of offenders is not affected by legislation, and the Court of Appeal may dismiss an appeal if there was no miscarriage of justice. 2. The trial judge adequately warned the jury about considering Colin Robinson's evidence. 3. The judge correctly did not leave the offense of manslaughter to the jury, as there was no evidence to suggest an unintended consequence. The court found that the joinder of Dawn Ferguson did not prejudice Roger Ferguson's trial. The trial judge's caution on Colin Robinson's evidence was deemed sufficient. I have no doubt that the pure financial loss to these children is huge, let alone the loss they've suffered at an emotional level, said Mr. Justice McLaughlin. Had 35-year-old Jacqueline Crimble and her 31-year-old lover Roger Ferguson gotten away with the Father's Day murder of her husband Paul 3 years ago, the scheming pair stood to gain just over STGG pound 435,000 euros. However, following a detailed examination carried out by the PSNI's Financial Investigations Unit, it has emerged that out of this figure, the true realizable assets is just short of STGG pound 90,000, which will now be put in trust for the children. In making the orders, one of confiscating the money from Crimble and the other of compensation to her children, Justice McLaughlin said it brought to an end what was for him a very sad affair. Earlier, the Newry judge, sitting in Belfast, said had Mr. Crimble died from natural causes or been murdered by someone else, his widowed wife would have received all of his estate, save for the bequeathed legacies he'd made to the children. Clearly, the policy of the law is to ensure that a perpetrator should not benefit from the death of his or her victim, said Mr. Justice McLaughlin. In the circumstances of this case, he added, his task was to determine whether Crimble benefited from the murder. I am satisfied that upon the death of Paul Crimble, his widow, Jacqueline Crimble, obtained an interest in all his property, said the judge. Crimble, jailed for life with a minimum of 20 years, is currently awaiting her appeal against her conviction for the murder of her husband, killed, in the words of the prosecution, out of her greed and lust for money.